Erectus, our atom, is a dynamo. With a body built for travel and a brain built to adapt, he will give rise to a remarkable range of humans. In South Africa, Lee Berger is on Erectus's trail, and Berger has unearthed yet another critical clue in our story. Here at a site called Hujjispint, several 100,000 years ago, hyenas dragged some kind of human into their den. It's impossible to say if the hyenas killed him or scavenged him as a corpse. Today, Berger is excavating this ancient grave, a fossilized hyena den. Animal bones tumble out, and so do human remains. This site is a rarity, an opportunity to peer into what Berger calls the dark zone.
The dark zone is that period between about 200,000 and 600,000 years where we have almost no human fossils in Africa. Hujjispint is one of the places that preserves really good ones, the rarest fossils that you can find.
The fossil bone Berger has found is not from Erectus. It's from his spawn, a supersized human species we call Goliath.
This is the tibia of Goliath, if you will. It's a fantastic specimen, 280,000 years old from here at Hujjispint. It represents one of these giants. It would have belonged to an individual that was maybe 6 foot tall. What's amazing is that we think it's from a child or a female, and that puts it right off the scale in height. It was a real giant.
Goliath appeared 700,000 years ago, and he wasn't the only giant.
One of the strange things about that period is that many of the animals are enormous.
Zebras weigh 80 kilos more than today's species, and Cape buffalo have horns 3 meters across, more than 2.5 times as wide as their living relatives today. Environmental forces that boost animal size made Goliath huge too. And as a hunter, Goliath would have to get bigger to keep pace with growing prey. He's locked in an ancient arms race. Goliath comes up with walking ape's next major invention, the throwing spear. Finely balanced, it's the ballistic missile of its day. It's the earliest evidence of a weapon manufactured for throwing.
Could you hand me those calipers? Sure.
Berger and paleoanthropologist Steve Churchill know Goliath was big. But just how big was this giant? There's only one way to find out. They've got to build him. Goliath's fossils contain powerful clues to his size. The investigators measure bones from one of the largest Goliath specimens to get a sense of his frame. The area of his eye socket gives an estimate of body weight. The area of the ball joint of his thigh gives a separate weight estimate. The length of his thigh is a good clue about his height. As Berger and Churchill run the numbers, they are in for a shock. Goliath was huge. He is the tallest and most massive human species ever discovered. To build their model, they merged their data with images of modern and ancient human body types. They're trying to hit on a credible combination of height and weight.
So the problem is we've got to find a body shape for this reconstruction. Okay, so what do you have here?
This Goliath is 90 kilos, 33% heavier than the biggest Erectus. They try to picture this weight on a body shaped like the first modern humans in South Africa.
That's right off the screen. That's like 7.5 feet tall.
Next, they try a Neanderthal-shaped body.
Well, it's obviously got to be more wide-bodied. What about if you put it on a Neanderthal type?
That's not going to work. I mean, that body shape's an adaptation to a cold climate, and this is Africa.
Finally, they try a wide body with long limbs. they settle on a 193 centimeter frame, a giant compared to any other early human.
I don't think we're going to do better with that. I think we have to go with that shape for the reconstruction.
I agree. Let's build it.
When they look Goliath in the eye, will they discover why he is extinct and we survived? In a South African lab, scientists and artists are starting work on a full-scale reconstruction of Goliath. Churchill thinks Goliath was nature's attempt to push the envelope of body size. Did his huge frame have a fatal downside in the heat of Africa? In a low-tech twist, Churchill uses birdseed to measure Goliath's volume. Too much volume could be lethal.
By measuring the volume of our model, I get an idea of mass. Because the more mass you have, the more muscle you have, the more organs that are creating heat.
Goliath used twice the energy our bodies do. So Goliath's engine was huge. What investigators want to know now is, how effective was his radiator? How did he avoid overheating and melting down? Skin is the most essential organ for keeping modern humans cool. It's our radiator. Goliath's skin would have worked in the same way. Did he have enough of it? To answer the question, Churchill must flay the giant and measure his entire skin. The area of this skin will reveal a deadly weakness in Goliath's design. Whatever his strengths and limitations, Goliath shares with his ancestor Erectus a desire to move. Scientists think that over 500,000 years ago, he became the second early human to leave Africa, and some believe the first to colonize Western Europe. Investigators are finding evidence in France that Goliath was becoming more human. They're discovering mysterious patterns of rock from Goliath's day. One interpretation is that he was adapting to Europe's cold climate by building crude shelters. Other evidence suggests that one group of Goliaths met with disaster. In northern Spain, scientists discovered the fossil remains of over 30 Goliaths, men, women, and children, at a site called the Pit of Bones. The victims all died around the same time. They might have been cut down by an epidemic. Some might have been cannibalized. Investigators just don't know what happened. Halfway around the world on the island of Flores, researchers have picked up the trail of a human even weirder than Goliath. It's a find that will capture the attention of the world. Scientist Bert Roberts knows that Goliath's ancestor Erectus arrived here over 800,000 years ago. But now, Roberts is finding stone tools from a time much closer to our own, and hints of something truly bizarre.
What we've got here is a flowstone, and this allows us to date the stone tools that are above it. We've got one above, which we've already dated to 100,000 years ago. What we now want to know is this 200,000 years old or 150,000 years old?
Whether the tools go back 100,000 years or a little more, They are notable because they would be among the most recent Erectus artifacts ever found in Asia. That is, if Erectus made these tools. The mystery deepens when the archaeologists make another discovery. Spear points less than 20,000 years old. Could Erectus have survived until so recently? Or was someone else living in this cave? Other evidence suggests that whoever made the spear points was a skilled hunter. The scientists find teeth from the primitive elephant stegodon and bits of Komodo dragon. Archaeologist Mike Morwood has proof that the early humans in this cave were thriving.
Here, people are clearly using fire. We have evidence for cooking, for the butchering of animals. Rats, bats, some fishing.
But who was this hunter? To find out will require finding more bones. Early human bones. That's always a long shot, but working in this cave improves the odds.
Caves like this are just perfect, because the limestone is a great preserver of fossil bone, whereas once you're out there in the open air, you've got very little chance of getting things preserved for a long time.
The team soon digs up the missing clue, the bones of the hunter. Morwood was away when Indonesian colleagues called. They said they'd found a tiny skeleton. It looked like a child's. But the next call gave Morwood the biggest surprise of his career.
And the next day, they said, it's not a child, it's just a very, very small adult, and it's not a modern human.
The bones were not what anyone expected. They were bizarre, as if Erectus had shrunk to half his size. Who was this tiny creature? This ancient hobbit? Investigators know that our ancestor Erectus arrived here over 800,000 years ago, but they haven't found his fossils. Instead, they found a totally unexpected, remarkable creature.
The head was at this end here, and the body extended out in this direction, and this area here was dated to about 18,000 years old.
For Roberts, it's a spectacular revelation. This creature didn't live hundreds of thousands of years ago. It survived later than any other early human known. Some were alive only 13,000 years ago. But there's something even stranger than its recent date: its size. Scientists nicknamed this creature the Hobbit.
Here's one of the arm bones of the Hobbit. So you can see it's half the size of my arm, and everything else was half size in the Hobbit. Half our height. No one had imagined that humans could be that small in the recent past.
Before announcing their tiny human to the world, the team had to convince themselves that the bones they'd found, of over half a dozen individuals, didn't belong to small modern humans like pygmies.
Well, if you look at pygmies, they don't look like the Hobbit at all. Things about the ears, things about the teeth, things about the skull anatomy, things about the bones also indicate he's not a modern human of any sort. It's not a young person who's still growing. The way the bones are fused, the way the teeth are, and the skull, all of those indicators are that it's a fully grown adult.
The Hobbit is indeed a new and strange human species. But what happened to Erectus? Amazingly, scientists think that over time, Erectus became the Hobbit. How did he get so small? Another species, the stegodon, was large when it arrived on Flores, but hundreds of thousands of years isolated on an island forced changes. large animals got smaller and became more efficient.
It helps if you're small on a very restricted base such as Flores. The smaller the island, the smaller you get.
The opposite is true for reptiles. They tend to get bigger.
Reptiles don't need to create heat. They're basically cold-blooded animals, so they can afford to get bigger. And in fact, it helps them to do so because then they can eat the dwarfed-down versions of the herbivores.
Evidence found at the cave reveals that hobbits had to contend with 10-foot-long Komodo dragons, even as these early humans were gradually shrinking.
It's the first time that it's actually been shown that people do shrink when they get stranded in the same sorts of environments as other mammals. But until this point in time, everyone said, oh no, we're too clever to do that. We don't shrink, we adapt, and we therefore, we just move into better places. Rubbish. We shrink just like any other mammal. We're an animal. We do exactly what every other animal does.
The Hobbit proves that early humans like Erectus could undergo radical transformations. Erectus spawned Goliath, who towered over the prehistoric world, reaching more than 193 centimeters. On the island of Flores, Erectus gave rise to the Hobbit half that height. The startling conclusion? When nature says grow, we grow. And when it says shrink, we shrink.
What do you got there, Ruckus?
Hobbit radius.
You'd think that the Hobbit would be at a disadvantage when it came to hunting. But his favorite prey was just as downsized, the pygmy stegodon. 27-kilo hobbits may have needed teamwork to bring down a tusked 400-kilo mini-elephant. The Hobbit forced investigators to consider an astonishing prospect, that evidence of other human creatures still undiscovered must be out there.
So we're going to have a situation where you've got many different hominid species in this part of the world. Populations which have evolved in isolation on other islands.
Many of Indonesia's islands could have molded their own unique forms. Each island, its own laboratory of human adaptability. The spectacular discovery of hobbits throws an even brighter light on Erectus as the central figure in our investigation. He gave rise not only to the smallest human species, the hobbit, but also the largest, Goliath. While the Hobbit revealed one human extreme, Goliath was showing us another.
It's easy for me to sort of think of him in terms of numbers, but to actually see this on a human being, to actually see it fleshed out, I think is going to be remarkable. It's going to make it real for me.
Wow. Fantastic.
Wow. He's huge.
He is huge. He's actually bigger than I thought. Look at the size of the arms. They really are giants.
Yeah.
There's just no other way to describe them, are there? I mean, it's out of all the proportions that you see, and to see one alive is incredible.
I think that this is a guy who probably had a problem staying cool.
Goliath's huge frame helped him in an Africa overrun with giant animals, but he may have paid a fatal price for his size. The measurements reveal that this Goliath would have churned out 100% more heat than our bodies do, but he had only 50% more skin area. Big engine, small radiator. Goliath couldn't survive in hot and humid places where sweating doesn't cool you down.
He was limited to dry environments. He's a thirsty guy and he's got to stay close to water sources.
Nature may have pushed Goliath too far. He was often at risk of boiling over. And that may be why he went extinct about 240,000 years ago. But Goliath left a legacy. It's a species that appeared around 200,000 years ago. We are that species. Homo sapiens, modern humans. Goliath is our father.
What the fossil evidence shows us now is that our ancestors were giants. They were creatures that were much bigger in their mass and stature than humans are today, all except the very rarest, the very biggest of all humans.
With Homo sapiens, humans have at last become physically modern, but our minds still lag behind. One more giant step remains in the journey from ape to man. On the southern coast of Africa, the trail of clues leads to a species spawned by Goliath, us. Modern humans have skills that separate us from every other species in the history of life. Here, in a place called Blombos Cave, archaeologist Christopher Henshelwood has found evidence of tremendous leaps forward in our mental development between 50 and 100,000 years ago. For the first time, we were making things that weren't absolutely necessary for survival. That's the very definition of modern human culture. Henshelwood is excavating clues about this mental revolution. It's some of the earliest evidence of modern humans organizing their living space.
Close to the front of the cave, over here, is where people were building their fireplaces.
This isn't random. Fire burning at the cave entrance keeps predators out.
And we can see along this wall, these dark marks indicate the charcoal from those fireplaces. They probably slept in the area behind over here.
They sleep in the most comfortable part of the cave.
Stone tools and the bone tools they were making would have been done over here.
They are refining their tools and weapons.
One of the most extraordinary items we find in the cave is this bone point. Very carefully produced, very carefully honed from a single piece of bone. This is a remarkable item.
Remarkable because these tools are far better than they need to be. Many creatures use tools, some even craft and shape them. But only modern humans have a sense of pride or beauty that drives their work. What caused such a dramatic break from the past? Answers may lie in the ocean at their doorstep.
Food is easily available, very close to the cave. Shellfish, fish.
Scientists have found that seafood powers a growing brain better than any other natural food.
This would have been relatively a paradise, if you like, a Garden of Eden. You're not spending your whole day, in other words, chasing animals across the landscape because you're desperate to eat. So you do have time to sit around the cave and ponder and work on your bone tool and perhaps polish it a bit more and to make a standard that is beyond what is required.
Easy access to food and water gave us spare time. Time to think and apply our brains to new problems. Henshelwood has found evidence of the first stirrings of the modern human mind. Shaped chunks of an iron pigment called ochre. Some of the pieces appear to have been scraped, as if to create a flat surface. Even more convincing are grooves on two of the pieces. The stones show a regular pattern, the result of a deliberate series of choices. The patterns may be a message, an early use of symbols, or an ancient form of art. Whatever the case, they are something entirely new in the history of life. No other animals, including earlier models of humans, ever did this. Well over 50,000 years ago, the people of the cave organized their living space much as we do today. And what they made with an eye for beauty as much as function. About 750,000 years after our father Goliath left Africa, we left on the third Great Migration. Equipped with unprecedented brain power, some of us headed to Europe. Here, about 35,000 years ago, modern humans encountered another human species. It was Neanderthal, probably a descendant of Goliath, just like us. With skin lightened to suit the new climate, we meet our sibling species face to face. What happens? It's possible that modern humans fight deadly battles with Neanderthal and even have a hand in their extinction. Whatever the cause, Neanderthal vanishes about 27,000 years ago, leaving us to dominate the playing field. But we weren't completely alone yet. We still had company in Indonesia, just north of Australia. In fact, modern humans made it to Australia 45,000 years ago. But to get there, they had to pass through Flores. And that means for thousands of years, modern human migrants likely shared this island with a species of tiny early humans, hobbits.
I think there's no way that they cannot have known each other on their way through it. I'd like to think that Homo sapiens were very nice to the hobbit, but the reality is that we're not nice to most of the animal species we come across.
What was the nature of the interaction between these two species? Did they, get on and trade, or was it one of competition? Did modern humans, eat little hominids? We don't have any evidence for the nature of the interaction yet, and it would be fascinating to actually find out why they continued to live here for so long.
Modern humans and hobbits probably came face to face. One had a brain capable of remarkable invention. The other was fine-tuned for life on Flores. Then, catastrophe struck. And one species was lost forever. A huge volcanic explosion may have wiped out half-sized humans, hobbits. The abruptness of the devastation shows up as a sharp line on a cave wall.
Coming up to this level here in the cave, this is the time of a major volcanic event which deposited this volcanic ash, and that's been dated to about 12,000 years ago. But above this point we've got no more remains of Stegodon, not the big ones nor the small ones, and no more remains of the hobbit either.
1 meter of ash fell here, the signature of an explosion potentially bigger than Krakatoa, one of the most massive eruptions in modern history. If not for this chance disaster 12,000 years ago, hobbits might still be alive. So how did modern humans survive this kind of cataclysm? It helped that we were spread around the world, not concentrated on a single island like hobbits. But did we also have something extra? Unique skills that made us the ultimate survivors. Scientist Spencer Wells thinks the answer is in our blood. By analyzing genes from people around the world, Wells has made a startling discovery about our struggle to survive. We almost didn't make it.
At some point in the past 70,000 years, we nearly went extinct.
Wells thinks he knows what took us to the brink. A volcanic eruption so powerful, it changed the Earth's climate.
There was a volcanic eruption which probably caused the Earth to cool down for several years.
The consequence in Africa may have been a deadly drought. There's no way to know how many of us died, only how many lived.
We have this genetic result that the population crashed to as few as 2,000 individuals.
Just 2,000 left, scattered around Africa 70,000 years ago. It was almost the end of the human race. This great squeeze on our population is a key marker in human history. All of us alive today come from the survivors who made it through, a group the size of a village. If the eruption had been slightly bigger, we could have gone extinct, and Earth today could belong to our competitors. But Wells thinks that we survived because of more than just chance.
You had to be smart in order to survive.
Only the most clever and creative lived through it. So the Great Squeeze made our species smarter.
It may have taken a global catastrophe to actually kickstart the human mind into high gear.
If Wells is right, our minds were becoming modern surprisingly early. Most experts believe that modern human behavior emerged 40,000 years ago. That's when paintings and carvings suddenly appeared all over Europe. But Wells thinks that 30,000 years earlier, most survivors of the Great Squeeze had these same abilities. In fact, the genetic seeds of this creativity, call them ultimate survivor genes, must have been scattered around Africa even before the Great Squeeze. When the catastrophe hit, anyone who lacked them died. Blombos Cave on the South African coast may be one place where early survivor genes flourished. In the cave, investigators are finding evidence of a mental revolution recorded in the shells of a tiny snail. They've found dozens of the shells, but they were too small to eat. So why were the shells in the cave? Each has a small hole in roughly the same position. Were the holes natural or man-made?
I went into the laboratory at the museum one day and I noticed on the lip small facets which were not present on natural shells. And that aroused my suspicions.
Opposite edges of the holes have flat areas, as if they've been worn away over time. Henshelwood's hunch is that the shells were beads, once strung together in a bracelet or necklace. One more piece of evidence clinches the case. The shells are dusted with ochre pigment. Someone colored them. That's powerful evidence they were jewelry. The significance? You don't wear jewelry unless you care what others think about you. And that's a uniquely human trait. Small as they are, the shells point to a huge leap into a modern way of thinking.
Once your behavior is in a sense controlled by symbolism, or in this case by perhaps beads or personal ornaments, then you're becoming modern.
If we can pinpoint when early humans made these beads, we'll know when we jumped from living like animals to living like us. 10,000 years ago, everyone was making jewelry. 80,000 years ago, nobody was. So just how old is this jewelry? To find out, scientist Zenobia Jacobs excavates sand from the cave layers where others found the shells. The sand contains a kind of clock that records the years since it was last hit by the sun's rays. By blasting the grains with a laser, Jacobs zeroes in on the bead's age. The date is dramatic. The beads are 75,000 years old. They are the world's oldest jewelry with a scientifically solid age. Modern humans made these beads 30,000 years earlier than most researchers believed was possible.
Blombos Cave and other sites in Africa are increasingly producing evidence suggesting to us that modern human behavior evolved in Africa at a point much earlier than we thought. And essentially, we're now looking at a whole new version of understanding when we became what we are.
Did the dawn of modern human behavior really occur so early? What about other great leaps, like the invention of clothing? A clue comes from a parasite that plagued us for millennia: the louse. Body lice evolved from head lice, but the body louse lives only between skin and close-fitting clothes, not just the rough animal hides worn by some early humans. If scientists can determine when body lice split off from head lice, they will know when we invented clothing. DNA analysis reveals the answer: 72,000 years ago, about the same time that the people of Blombos were putting on eyeliner and jewelry. These new discoveries provide a stunning new portrait of our ancestors. Over 70,000 years ago, modern humans at Blombos are clever and creative. During the Great Squeeze, when climate change almost wipes out our species, people like these are most likely to survive. Their direct descendants reach Europe 45,000 years ago, carrying the torch of human creativity.
What happened at the dawn of creativity? We know very little about the genes that control those sorts of characteristics. What are those key genetic changes which made us fully modern? That's the Nobel Prize winning question.
What ignited the modern mind? Part of the answer may lie in the power of our tongues. Mutations are hit and miss. Mostly miss. The majority of genetic changes bring about terrible results. The rare few deliver an advantage and prompt an unexpected jump. To piece together the small steps and big leaps that make up the human evolutionary journey, we have to use every clue available. For Spencer Wells, this means another close examination of our genes.
Throughout human evolution, we have gone through these periods where there have been massive changes. Most of these would have been caused by genetic changes, by mutations in the DNA. Compare
the nearly identical gene from a chimp. The human gene differs in small but extremely important ways. 2 mutations in this gene appeared in us 1 to 200,000 years ago. These changes allowed us to move our mouths and tongues in new ways. In turn, this new physical ability may have set us down the path to developing language. And language sets us apart from other animals. More than any other human talent, it is the ultimate mental power tool. Language makes it possible to share ideas. It lets us communicate about what might be. But language may point to another advantage. Primate researcher Richard Wrangham finds a clue to this edge when he compares human societies to chimps.
Chimps don't have the ability to control the bullies within their own communities, and as a result, they're just a typical despotic species.
Compared with chimps, we are surprisingly non-violent.
Within society, we're incredibly peaceful. We're very nice to each other. Chimpanzees have rates of violent aggression with each other about 100 to 1,000 times as frequently within communities.
Between one society and another, our species can be extremely violent. After all, we fight wars. But what accounts for our relative peacefulness within our communities? The answer, according to Wrangham, is language. For eons, every ape or human society had some members who tried to bully others. When language came along, it allowed the weak to team up against the bullies. That's how we still work out our problems today.
We don't have an alpha male who bullies the rest. We have a group of the non-alphas who bully the alpha. We have a coalition of the timid.
Over time, Wrangham says, the timid hatched plots and actually murdered large numbers of bullies.
That kind of killing has selected against the genes that make people aggressive within groups.
With the rise of language, small groups of people grew into societies. These societies became peaceful because they were weeding out the bullies. As we made ourselves cooperative, physical changes that began long ago with the walking ape called Lucy accelerated. Our skulls, once thick to protect us from each other, get thinner. With fewer threats, stress drops dramatically, and our brain chemistry changes. Thanks to genetic mutations that led to language, we became a new breed of human, far more peaceful and cooperative than any previous walking ape.
One of the enormous advantages that we modern humans would have had over any other species that we encountered is that we work well together. We cooperate well within our own species.
Cooperation lets us build on each other's inventions. Compared to modern humans, Go-It-Alone Erectus comes up short. He invents a great tool. Call it Axe 1.0. But it doesn't change for a million years. He uses it for just about everything. It isn't so much the right tool for the job, it's the only tool. We are different.
When we have a problem, we have a never-ending supply of ideas. We can take any types of tools and use them to solve the problem. Tools that we have, or we can invent tools. We can go on and on, always creating a new tool to solve the same problem or any problem that comes along.
Consider the tuber. Early Erectus dug it up with Axe 1.0 and ate it raw. For us, there's more than one way to skin a tuber. We can slice, dice, rice, fry, broil, and bake. In fact, we'll never stop coming up with ideas. We are the ultimate survivors because we have an infinite toolkit, our brains. Amazing discoveries are outdating the textbooks and giving us an altogether new picture of our story.
From the present day, we have a very distorted view of what human history has been. Human history has not been one human species, ourselves, living on this planet for the last 2 million years. It's been a whole host of human species.
For millions of years, nature dabbled with the human form. Many of these walking apes encountered each other. But the human tree starts to thin out as you climb from Erectus to Goliath to us. When our species left Africa around 60,000 years ago, we were one lucky breed of human. We'd survived a close brush with extinction, the Great Squeeze 20,000 years before, and we were the smarter for it. In Europe, we met Neanderthal. The encounter may have been as charged as that between Cain and Abel, for we both likely came from the same father, Goliath, and we were rivals for the same land. Only 13,000 years ago, we had what may have been our last encounter with another kind of human, the Hobbit in Indonesia. Now, all of the others are gone. Nature's lab in human experiments is closed. We are the last man standing. Luck played a role in our success, just as it does for any other animal that avoids extinction. But talent also contributes to our unique circumstances today.
This is probably the only time in the last 4 million years that there's only one form of human walking around on the planet. And I think that the downfall of our Goliath and the downfall of the Neanderthals and the downfall of Erectus was us. It was our brains, our adaptability, our innovativeness. We were just simply better at doing things than they were. And wherever we encountered them, we just outdid them. We outcompeted them. We brought this to pass, our being the only human occupants of this planet.
Our journey from ape to man has been one long, strange trip. Our infinite toolkit, our uncanny adaptability, our unique skill of language, and a good dose of serendipity combined to create the ultimate survivor. The advantage goes to the cooperative ape, us. And as luck would have it, we've taken off like a rocket.